and welcome to West Country Wanderings. Welcome to another one in my Lost Railway Walk series. As you know, because my father is still poorly at the moment, he is now out of hospital, which is great news, but he's still recuperating, so still needing to care for him at the moment. So making another video close to where I live in Stroud in Gloucestershire. We're going to be doing Lost Railway walks from the delightful Cotswold town of Tetbury, and that heads out in the direction of Kemble. You can't walk along all of it, but you can go to a place called Trouble House Inn. I'll tell you some more about the Trouble House Inn when we get there, because it's a really interesting place. But along the way today, I'll tell you some more about the history of this fascinating branch line. Of course, part of the GWR extensive network here in Gloucestershire. It's a most delightful place. It was actually protected by the present king, who was then Prince Charles. He lived nearby at Highgrove House, and in 1996 he set up a trust to protect the goods shed and the lands around it, and also this right of way as far as the Trouble House Inn. Most delightful place just on the edge of the town centre. It's been wonderful to have seen steam trains, or indeed ridden on them, on this wonderful section here in the Cotswold. So you can join me again for the walk here on the Lost Railway Adventure here in Gloucestershire. Now, the trust that then Prince Charles, now present-day King Charles, set up was called the Rail Lands Trust, and it was to protect this as a right-of-way and also what was left of the railway line. And we'll come on to the history of the railway line later in today's walk. But today you have the wonderful goods shed. It started out as a bit of disaster because in 2001 there was a serious fire and it was thought that the whole thing would be demolished. However, a few years later there was grants and applications to restore it completely. Happy to say now it's completely fully restored, and it's a wonderful asset to the town here in Tetbury. I have done a separate video all about the goods shed. I'll click a link, or there will be a link should I say, to that video at the end of this one here today. So how did this railway line start here in Gloucestershire, Cotswolds? Well, it all started back in May of 1841 when the Cheltenham and Great Western Union Railway started to build a line up from Brunel's line from Paddington to Bristol Temple Meads at Swindon Junction, and making its way north to the town of Cirencester. And it did that from a branch line effectively from Kemble, although at that point Kemble Station had not been constructed. There's a very good reason for that, because one, Squire Gordon did not want a station built on his land at all, so yes, that never happened, and it went directly into Cirencester, what was later to become a branch line from Kemble to Cirencester, also now sadly no more. In 1845 the line was completed from where the line turned off towards Cirencester, making its way north through Stroud, Gloucester and that way into Cheltenham. Now, if you want to get really fit on this walk here, you can use the outdoor gym equipment as well. Balance beams here, provided by Tetbury Town Council and Gloucestershire County Council. Haven't seen anyone using them. There's a lot of dog walkers here there. Although it is towards the end of Easter, the break, the 3-week break that we've had. A lot of the schools in where I live in Gloucestershire have already returned, but there's lots of families out and about here, so obviously it's not uniform in terms of Easter. Some are still on holiday, but they're certainly enjoying the delights of this old railway line here in Gloucestershire. Now you can make out some railway fence posts there, just the other side of the stream there. Just to clarify, although Kemble Station wasn't built as we know it today because of the aforementioned Squire Gordon, there was also no road access, so there was a small interchange station. There was one at Gloucester as well. It was called a T-station transfer. And the reason that was built there in 1845, because trains were then going straight through from Paddington right through to Cheltenham and not diverging off to Cirencester. So they needed a station at Kemble for people to get off there so they could catch and get their onward connection onto Cirencester. But there was no road access there. It was purely for an interchange for the passengers going between there and Cirencester. Now, in the same year that the line was completed through from Paddington to Cheltenham span 1845, another company called the Wiltshire and Gloucestershire Junction Railway decided to build a railway from the town of Stonehouse in Gloucestershire through to the Wiltshire town of Chippenham. And that would have gone right through Tetbury, or very close by it, serving the town's needs here in this wonderful part of the Cotswolds. Although plans were well advanced in terms of planning the line and the route and who they were going to use for contractors, it didn't come to anything. So sadly, the poor people that lived in Tetbury were still stuck with that halt at Tetbury Road, just a couple of miles outside of the town itself. Now, the Gloucestershire and Wiltshire Joint Railway running from Stonehouse to Chippenham would have been a direct competitor to the GWR, and they weren't very at all keen on their plans to go into their territory, if you like. I'm not sure if they directly thwarted the plans so it never came to anything or not. Really hard to find that out, but maybe they had some underhand dealings. I wouldn't be at all surprised with what happened in the 1840s around railway mania in the United Kingdom. In 1884, however, the GWR did propose to build a branch line from Kemble, which has now got more established because it was starting to get road access to it. Squire Gordon was starting to relent. There's also a railway tunnel there, which is a vanity tunnel. It's not to go under a hill as such. It's to hide the view of the railway line from Squire Gordon's land on house. They decided to build this railway line, which would have cost them £68,000 and would have been just over 7 miles long. But 3 years later, not one sod of soil had been turned over to start construction of this branch line. Now, this part of the walk here goes through what's known as Preston Park. A most delightful place it is as well. I'm not sure the history of Preston Park and how originally when the railway line was built they got permission. Well, they would have got a compulsory purchase order just to bang the railway through, but it's really delightful now, and as I say, it would have been a wonderful journey on the train. There's probably more trees than when the line was in existence though. Now, I have taken a little bit of artistic license here because the railway track didn't go over this stream. That beautiful one you can just see here on this bridge. Although I have noticed that this bridge, which was obviously clearly built after the railway line closed, has got a very firm base made up of the old rails which would have been lifted from this branch line after it closed in 1964. Anyway, we need to rewind our story back, sorry about the flare there, and retrace the steps a little bit back up to the track bed up there so I can tell you more about the story of this branch line. As I say, it's fascinating, but it's also worth taking your time to savour this walk. It's not just about how quickly you can get along the railway line, but also exploring the little bits and pieces that lie just off the track bed. Now here you can make out the railway fence posts there. Incidentally, this railway line was always built, and we'll come on to that again in a bit, as standard gauge. It wasn't a conversion to broad gauge like a lot of the railway lines that were on the Great Western Railway network. It's an absolute delight filming this today, recording this in the early part of April 2024 after what seemed like 7 months of almost continuous rain. It's been a very, very wet February and March, and this is certainly the warmest day that we've had so far this year. It's up to 19 degrees and wonderful signs of spring with the bluebells out, the woodland celandines down there as well, the birdsong. I've seen lots of butterflies as well. I've seen Yellowstone butterflies and orange tips as well, but with my usual luck in photography and butterflies, I haven't captured any of them on film or stills. I'm really rubbish at doing butterflies, but just enjoying the sights and sounds of nature is wonderful, as well as appreciating the construction of this railway line here in Gloucestershire. Now, just through the trees and the hedgerow there, that is the site of Orwell Spring. Now, Orwell Spring is very, very significant because it forms part of the source of the River Avon. And now that's the River Avon that flows through much of North Wiltshire and right through into the cities of Bath, at Bristol, going into the Bristol Channel at Avonmouth, not to be confused with the other Avons that are on my channel here on West Country Wanderings, like the one round Salisbury further part south of Wiltshire, and also the one that comes out of Stratford-on-Avon. No, none of those, but I think it has two sources. So this part of it, I do believe, is called the Tetbury Avon. So we're continuing our walk to Trouble House Inn. I'll tell you the significance about that, and also about the inn itself, because it has an amazing history. So we're continuing on here. There was a gate here which prevented you going on any further last time I was here, but the gate is open, so we're going to continue on to Trouble House here today. Now, the construction of the railway line started around late 1887, and the line actually opened in 1889. There was an inspection by the Board of Trade in November, and the line opened in December of that year, so 2 years construction. It's a lightly engineered line, so there's no heavy embankments, there's no deep cuttings, and there's no tunnels. So it was a relatively easy line to construct. Here I noticed there is a light embankment because we've got the river, and it's very much needed at the moment because there's a lot of water, which I mentioned earlier on. But yes, we've got water flowing in around there, and there's another little stream that goes down that way. The line itself, though, when it opened, had just 5 train services a day out from the main line at Kemble on the Swindon to Gloucester line. It goes on up to Cheltenham, of course. And there was no service on a Sunday, so it was fairly like it was not a major freight line. Although a lot of that traffic, I say 5 trains, they were mixed, so they had passengers and goods on the same train to reduce transport costs. Now, there was one part of the line that did need a bit of engineering work, and that was to build Tetbury Station. Also, its extensive goods yard. You can see where the goods shed is now, that's been restored to the Arts Centre, Tetbury Goods Shed, that would have taken quite a bit of effort. You can see the quarry there, and that would have taken quite a bit of work to have done when this line was built. But apart from that, no other work was required extensively, apart from some minor embankments, as I said, to avoid the stream on there, and also the embryonic River Avon, the Tetbury Avon. But it's still most delightful. Obviously, there's, as I say, there's more extensive trees here than there would have been when the line was running, but you can just imagine steam train running down through here towards Kemble to meet their main line, and the train on down to London Paddington. Now, in terms of signalling on the line, it was relatively straightforward to provide signalling for this line here, 7 miles long, out of the junction from Kemble. There was a signal box at Kemble which controlled most of the line, and also there was a signal box in Tetbury itself, and effectively that was it, because as I say, it was single, it didn't need much else. There was, however, one loop and one intermediate station, and that was at a place called Colkerton. Now the station there has been restored, although it's private and access is difficult, so I don't think I will try and get to it today. But I think on a previous occasion, when I did the Tetbury goods shed video, I did include a shot of it from my telephoto lens. If I can find that or another shot of it, I'll include that roundabout now. But our journey continues along here, and then I'll tell you about the 4 halts that were on this line, including the one we're walking to here today. Probably wondering what these are behind me, but they're actually nothing to do with the railway, but to do with the Second World War. They were placed here in 1940, and they're part of the Stop Line Green project. You ought to have Stop Line Red and Stop Line Blue, which protected the wider port of Bristol, which was seen as being military significant for the Germans to come and attack and invade. But these continue on the Stop Line Green, I think goes up towards the village of Avening, which I did do a vlog there about 3 or 4 months ago if you want to check that out. But yeah, so it's good to see these still here, and even better, a wonderful explanatory board. I'll do a photograph and insert that now so you can have a look at that and pause it to read it if you wish to find out some more information about this remnant of Stop Line Green right next to the former railway track bed of the Tetbury branch line. So yes, there were 4 halts on the line. Working our way out from Kemble, the first halt was at Jackamont's Bridge. The next one was probably more used than the rest, and that was to serve the village of Rodmartin. So yes, Rodmartin halt. And then you heard Church Hill halt. And finally, the one we're walking to today, Trouble House halt, which was opened to serve the nearby inn. But that didn't actually open until 1959, so it only was open for just 5 years. Now you can see at this point that the line was cleverly routed to avoid any cuttings or tunnels. That there is Newtown Hill, and there's a stream down in there. I think that is our aforementioned Avon, but I'm not entirely certain because it's not that clear on the map, that it's just following the contour, so it's escaping that completely, and we can have a nice level track bed here. Now from the 1930s onwards, this branch line, like many others on the GWR network, was struggling financially because of increasing competition from the roads. The bus services, even rural bus services, were increasing as well, and car ownership, although it wasn't that widespread in the 30s, was starting to take a hold. In order to cut costs, what the GWR did was to replace the steam engines on this wonderful 7-mile branch line to Kemble and replace them with a diesel rail bus. And although steam official narrows won't like that, for a little bit it did help save the line, and it kept the services running at the same frequency into the junction at Kemble. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. The line was proposed for closure in Dr. Beecham's infamous report of 1963. Sadly, it wasn't enough. On the 4th of May 1964, the last scheduled train service ran on this branch line. It wasn't without protest though, very significant one of the most significant ones that I've come across. Hay bales were planted across this branch line and they were set fire to. Most dramatic of all was at Treble House Halt. When the train stopped there, a coffin was placed on the engine marked Dr. Beeching. It wasn't quite the final service though, because the very next day Gloucester Railway Society ran a steam special along the branch line. But after that was it. The Tetbury branch line was no more. For a few years, not a great deal happened, but track started to be lifted around 1966, 1967. And in 1970, probably the most fatal blow of all, the Tetbury, wonderful station at Tetbury, was completely demolished, apart from the goods shed. Now we're on a final approach to Trouble House Inn, and while we do the last quarter of a mile or so, I wanted to tell you a little bit about this inn because it's fascinating and it certainly lived up to its name. So it's a classic country inn with an interesting history. It was built by one John Reeve, a carpenter, in 1754. It was particularly troublesome shortly after it was built due to flooding and poor build quality. At that time, though, the inn was referred to as the Wagon and Horses until 1856. Two landlords, John Bird from 1757 and Richard Reeve from 1768, were the first to suffer bad luck. John Bird apparently lost several wives when they were young, the wives that is, and Richard Reeve suffered financially when his customers were abducted by press gangs to fight into the American Revolution. I don't think I've ever read anything about that before, press gangs and the American Revolution. Certainly not here in the southwest of England. Really strange. If you know any more about that, please drop a comment below. Later, in 1830, the pub was caught up in the then agricultural riots. A local farmer had actually got some new equipment, and he was set upon and ambushed near the Trouble House Inn, and his new equipment was promptly set on fire. There was lots of incidents around the pub protesting against new industry, new technology, which reduced the need for manpower and labour. Where have we come across that before? AI? So this is the Trouble House Inn behind me. I can't get a front shot or piece to camera front shot because of the busyness of the road. Trouble House Old on the railway line lie just the other side of that noisy road, and it ran parallel to it, the halt being almost opposite Trouble House Inn itself. Let's see if I can find an old photograph of that. The Tetbury Trail, though, which we've been walking along part today, actually doesn't finish here. It continues along this path here towards the village of Rodmartin, although it doesn't actually follow the course of the old Tetbury branch line at this point. Now our story of the Trouble House Inn doesn't quite finished. There was another landlord that was reputed to have got into financial difficulty and hung himself here at this inn in the middle of the 19th century, although some sources actually dispute that though. There are also lots of people that claim they've seen a ghost here, the so-called Lady in Blue, and some of those sightings are still being reported here today, but hopefully these days the Trouble House Inn is a lot less troublesome. As I say, the halt here was only open for 5 years. It opened in 1959, I guess, to revive the fortunes of the inn. Of course, these days, most people arrive here using their car, which is a bit of a shame. Although our walk took us just 2 miles to come out of the town of Tetbury, so if you're going at a reasonable pace, you could do that in less than an hour because it is a flat walk. It's taking me longer because, of course, I'll be doing pieces to camera and photography, but very, very enjoyable. I hope you've enjoyed this lost railway walk today here near the town of Tetbury, continuing on in the direction of Kemble in Gloucestershire. There'll be another one in the Lost Railway Walk series in the not too distant future, so I hope you enjoy me again for that. Until then, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you on West Country Wanderings again very soon. Bye for now. Cheers.